Good afternoon, almost good evening. Thank you for the time to present to you this afternoon. My name is Bernane Lloyd, and I'm here on behalf of Northwatch, and I will be making a general presentation on behalf of Northwatch. We'll have other presentations later on in this hearing by our experts retained to provide some assistance to Northwatch and to the panel. Some may recognize that the title of our presentation is a borrowed title from an important book by Dr. Kristen Schrader-Frissett, released in the mid-90s, when some of us found ourselves in a different room discussing a somewhat different proposal to bury high-level nuclear waste. In that case, it was in the Canadian Shield, and I think the title is apt, given the huge uncertainties, the very large uncertainties that relate to this project, uncertainties with respect to the waste inventory, to the operator, basic design decisions, and most important and all-encompassing, the ability of this proposed deep geologic repository to actually isolate, sequester, contain the waste and the radiological burden over the time required. Northwatch is a regional coalition in northeastern Ontario, and our interest in waste management, nuclear waste management, goes back to our members' involvement in the pre-Northwatch period prior to 1988. In the 1970s, when there were investigations of Northern Ontario for a repository location or design for high-level waste. We were founded in 1988 in part to participate in those discussions, and we have been participating in various review processes since 1990, beginning with the Seaborne Commission scoping sessions and right through to May 2013 in the Pickering relicensing hearing, where we looked at waste issues, given our concerns about the long-term management and the potential for some repository at some time to have adverse effects on the lands, people, water region of Northern Ontario. We've participated in this review in all phases to date, and today is our first presentation, a general presentation, and as I've said, we will have our experts presenting at later dates. I want to begin just with a summary, with an overview, looking at what Ontario Power Generation has built their case on, how they put their package together. And begin by looking at the key messages. So Ontario Power Generation, in their environmental impact statement, identify what they call their key messages. And I just want to very briefly unbundle some of those messages. They list them, and I'll list them for you in paraphrasing them. They want to encourage public comment. Well, encourage public comment is great, that's good. What you do with the public comment, how you engage the public, how public input then affects design decisions, project evolution, is a much more important question. And I just want to share with you an anecdote. July 3rd, 2 days before the registration to the deadline to register for this hearing, I stopped by the Bruce Power Centre. And I know it's Bruce Power, it's no longer OPG, but there's a fair amount of cooperation there. OPG does have some displays. There is a display about the Deep Geological Repository proposal. There was not a single piece of literature available about the Deep Geological Repository. There was not a single note or notice of this review. There was certainly no notice of the, immediately impending deadline to register. So encourage public comment, maybe encourage public engagement. Big questions. OPG has a proven track record. Great, but is it a good track record? I think that we can look at the CNSC website at any day to look at OPG's failures in performance. In my written submission, I summarized some. I was writing fresh from the Pickering Review, summarized just some of the examples of failed performance, related, some of them specifically relating to their waste management practices at just one plant, at Pickering. So a proven track record, what did it prove? That there are problems. Kincardin's preferred option. We have real questions about who chose for who. And a question, not a determination, but a question as around to what degree was Kincardine in 2002 and 2004 acting as a proxy for Ontario Power Generation. Certainly outside the region, outside of council chambers, outside of those meeting rooms, we can't make that determination. But we have a question. The geology provides barriers. We hear over and over again that it's multiple barrier. Well, in the international discussion of geological repositories for radioactive waste, multiple barrier generally means a combination of engineered barriers and the geologic barrier. And starting with the waste form itself, then an engineered container, then the geological barrier, which might require additional engineering to fortify it. But that's the normal discussion. OPG has 2 layers, limestone, shale. So certainly not consistent with the international conversation. Whether those barriers are effective or not is a central question in this review. They'll only proceed with community support. Pleased to hear it. It's not been demonstrated. When, what's the question? What's the mechanism? How is the means? The language of the NWMO is a compelling demonstration of community willingness. But that compelling demonstration of community willingness in the Nuclear Waste Management Organization world is undefined. Well, here, we don't even see the question still to be put to the community or the communities that can be affected. It will not contain nuclear fuel waste. Good to know. OPG has contracted NWMO to manage the project through the regulatory approvals process. When we met with NWMO to discuss this project, I think it was in 2011, we were told at that time, and this is just my recollection, it's not in the minutes, in the meeting report that NWMO provided of our meeting, but we were told at that time that NWMO also expected to operate the repository. So who's the operator? Big questions around who does what, who the players are. OPG's declared need for the project. Also in their environmental impact statement, they identify in the discussion of need, interesting that need isn't a key message. There is a separate discussion on need, and they have 4 statements of need. 3 of them could be met equally, according to the independent assessment study, could also be met by other options. The only need that it could be argued can only be met by the DGR is the need to remove it from surface. And we had some discussion briefly about that this morning, about impending social collapse and so on. That's never been substantiated. It was more part of the discussion in the 1990s, I think, than it is now. And certainly OPG hasn't provided any examination of loss of institutional control, social collapse, and so on. But it's their only statement of need that actually is specific or unique to the DGR. The deficiency statement, deficiencies in Ontario Power Generation, because I see my time is going, I'm going to come back to that in our summary of expert. But in conclusion, Ontario Power Generation has not provided you, the panel, with an application that is approvable. And I think it leaves you in a position of having to say either come back later or no. So the Deep Geological Repository as a project, 3 items I want to touch on quickly. The project as a precedent. So there's lots of hypothesizing being done in the course of these discussions, and I'm going to boldly put forward a hypothesis of my own. Our hypothesis is that the primary interest of OPG in developing this deep geological repository is to secure a precedent for nuclear waste burial in Canada. At the end of the Seaborne Commission review of ACL concept, I think there was a general agreement that the industry's biggest challenge was social acceptance, gaining what OPG calls a social license. There's no urgent need for this geological repository. When the Western Waste Management Facility, in the Western Waste Management Facility environmental assessment in 2004, there's no mention of a deep geological repository, even though it was being developed concurrent with this project. So the primary challenge industry faces is getting that social license. In the case of this deep geological repository, they have at least the semblance of community acceptance. They have a site already selected. They had access to the site and an ability to do preparation at least a decade in advance. This deep geological repository is not the only one. And in this area, in Bruce County, you hear about DGR2. And DGR2, on the screen, there's 21 communities being studied, 12 in Northern Ontario, for what in other regions is called the NWMO, or the High-Level Waste Burial Proposal. ACL also has a proposal to bury legacy waste at the Chalk River site on the Ottawa River. And we learned recently that Cameco has a proposal for something in Blind River on the north shore of Lake Huron. They call it a mound. It might be burial, it might be shallow, we don't know. But it's in a preliminary decommissioning plan, which CNSC has and has not been made available to the public. In this instance, in this case, OPG blurs the line between low-level waste and intermediate-level waste. The question is, or our expectation is, that in the next round, after they've got the precedent, after they've got a DGR approved for low and intermediate level waste, the next line to blur will be the line between intermediate level waste and high level waste. They're already burying intermediate level waste. It's highly radioactive. Next step, high level waste burial. So we look at the use of international experience in this review, and we have the view that OPG's intent is to create a made in Canada experience that they can use in the same way, not necessarily with accuracy, not necessarily appropriately, but which they can use in future efforts. The project evolution, we looked at the project over, because we don't, we can't manage all of the details of all of the 20,000 pages. What we did is we looked at the project as it evolved by looking at 2005, 2008, and 2011. What we saw in looking at it that way were there were some consistencies. There were going to be shafts. There was going to be access. There were going to be tunnels. There were going to be rooms. There was going to be waste. But the underground layout was going to change. The access was only selected partway through the project evolution. There was a modification between 2008 and 2011 of the block walls from closed to open. The number of emplacement rooms from 38 to 43 to 31. The waste volume steadily went up. The surface footprint dramatically increased, surface 15 to 30 hectares, underground footprint 30 to 40. And so the project was to 2011 still in evolution. 2013, we hear lots of uncertainties, lots of things that still need to be worked out, lots of verification that's going to happen, way down the road in operational phase. What is the project now? we don't know. We do know what the project might become because we have had other discussions with Ontario Power Generation. For example, beginning in the Pickering hearing, in the environmental impact statement, OPG says repeatedly, this discussion is limited to operating waste. This discussion does not include decommissioning waste. Decommissioning wastes are, elsewhere. At the Pickering hearing, we raised a question about the regional waste facility that OPG said they were going to use for their decommissioning waste, equidistant from OPG's reactor stations. It became a very fuzzy. Statement was for financial planning purposes, no real repository, no real plan, no waste management facility. August, Laurie Swamy at a CNSC meeting stated quite directly that OPG intended to send the decommissioning waste to this DGR. I think Ms. Swamy said something similar on opening day, and certainly the Toronto Star reported today that I think it was Derek Neal from Ontario Power Generation stated that OPG does intend to send the decommissioning waste to this DGR, and they've sent you a letter. The Joint Review Panel has received a letter from Ontario Power Generation. Toronto Star report. I haven't seen the letter. Don't know if you have, but OPG can perhaps clarify. The project application. So we have retained 6 experts to assist us in our review, and we did that because we, as a citizens organization, we obviously don't have the kind of expertise to evaluate this really complex proposal, and I'm not going to wade into the details of our experts' findings. But we identified 6 areas of study, and what I found very interesting in reviewing our experts' finding is the way they click together. These were 6 experts who did not work together as a team. A few of them knew each other, had worked together in the past, but in generally we didn't organize them as a team. We asked 6 experts to review 6 areas, and their conclusions really reinforced and were mutually supportive. And just in summary, I think you'll find their conclusions, their findings, are quite consistent with Northwatch's own review, the key conclusion being that this is not a project that is worthy of approval. So additional issues, and then we have another basket we call additional issues, but we have a basket of additional issues that we don't even have in our written submission for reasons of time and capacity and so on. Some of those are issues that we didn't cover in our written submission were around the soundness of OPG's selection of shaft versus ramp. We touched on that very briefly already this week. Ontario Power Generation's claim that the site is exempt from interest from other resource development. Shale oil, I think Dr. Muick was raising quite well earlier today, but shale oil, shale gas, if you look at the evolution of the minerals commodity, rare earth elements 20 years ago were not a commodity. Now they're a very hot commodity. I'm not saying this is a rare earth element, mine. I'm just saying commodities evolve, commodities emerge, markets emerge. And so I don't think they've really supported that. And there's the absence of any discussion of quality assurance, quality control, in particular for the waste packaging. I know OPG says they're not relying on the packages at all. They're only going to rely on the rock, which is an exceptional position for them to take. Why they would forsake that additional barrier, why they would not take a precautionary approach and also have an engineered barrier, and why they wouldn't look at their containers for their ability to provide that barrier is mystifying. But there's no quality assurance, no quality control anywhere along the line, from what we've been able to determine looking at their 20,000 pages of application. I haven't read all 20,000 pages. The nature of the waste, as discussed over the first few days, intermediate level waste is highly radioactive. There's also issues around, so there's a lot of issues around the way OPG has classed, has grouped, blurred the line between low-level waste and intermediate-level waste. There's also questions around the evolving waste inventory. And do you have an accurate waste inventory in front of you? Some of our experts note the lack of any chemical analysis, chemical discussion in the waste inventory and the reference inventory and in their documents. And we haven't seen a waste inventory since 2002. So they have a 2008, there may be earlier, there may be others, but the ones we've been able to access, a 2008 reference inventory, a 2010 reference inventory, no 2012 reference inventory. So I don't know where you look to get an accurate inventory of the wastes that they're proposing to place in them. So centrally, I think the central question for you is, what is the project you have before you? What are you approving? In conclusion, our key finding is that Ontario Power Generation has not provided you with the basis for approving the environmental assessment, their application for a license to prepare the site, or their application for a license to construct. I think that subsequent to that, I think the most reasonable and the only really sound, reliable option for you is to reject the applications before you. We do in our written submissions add some without prejudice recommendations that if you decide to stray into that terrible territory of considering approving this incomplete application, these incomplete applications. We do list some of the precautions that we would recommend you build into that to limit limit the consequences of such an approval. And we would add an additional one today, given following the discussion with CNSC about the licensing process. And you'll recall this morning we were talking about, I think it was this morning, maybe this afternoon, we were talking about the verification and how there are many aspects of the project OPG says they're going to verify in the operating period, not just the construction, not just site preparation, not just construction. They'll be verifying many of their predictions in operating phase. I think that if that were ever to be the case, if they were ever to go to operations on the basis of this very incomplete and unsubstantiated application, I think then to have a one-year term license would probably be too long. If CNSC is going to be making decisions, we heard from CNSC how the public opportunity to engage is through the licensing processes. Well, CNSC has been on a bit of a trend. Facilities in our region have gone from a one-year license to a two-year license to a five-year license to a 10-year license. So how long a license would be granted, and what would the opportunity be for any kind of public oversight once a license was granted? And of course it goes, maybe without saying that your influence is over at that point. So in effect, you're being asked to approve a project based on future decisions that you won't have influence over. So thank you.